The Supreme Court has ruled on the immunity case regarding Donald Trump. And in my opinion, this ruling is a complete sham. Completely in line with everything that this particular Supreme Court has been up to lately. They basically found a way to do three things: say nothing, protect Trump, and avoid being impartial. Let's look at the actual wording of the ruling. The first step in deciding whether a former president is entitled to immunity from a particular prosecution is to distinguish his official from unofficial action. So what they laid out in their ruling was, let's decide whether Trump's actions were official or unofficial. With those principles in mind, they looked at the indictments against Trump. The indictment alleges that as part of the conspiracy to overturn the illegitimate results of the 2020 presidential election, Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to leverage the Justice Department's power and authority to convince certain states to replace their legitimate electors with Trump's fraudulent slates of electors. I'm sure all you guys remember this. They tried to send false, fraudulent electors to D.C. According to the indictment, Trump met with the acting attorney general and other senior Justice Department White House officials to discuss investigating purported election fraud and sending a letter from the department to those states regarding such fraud. The indictment further alleges that after the acting attorney general resisted Trump's request, Trump repeatedly threatened to replace him. I'm sure you guys remember this. Trump wanted these fraudulent electors to take place of the real electors. He wanted this election fraud thing to move forward, but there was no evidence. And he threatened to fire the acting attorney general if he didn't do his bidding, which is very blatantly, clearly an attempt to use his executive powers to subvert a legitimate election. I mean, this doesn't take some constitutional law scholar to see what the fuck Trump was up to. But what did the Supreme Court say? The allegations, in fact, plainly implicate Trump's conclusive and preclusive authority. The executive branch has exclusive authority and absolute discretion to decide which crimes to investigate and prosecute, including with respect to allegations of election crime. The allegations of election crime was coming from Trump himself. He's the source of the allegation. Say what the fuck you want, but Trump was claiming the election was stolen 6 months before it happened. So for the Supreme Court to decide that he's using his exclusive authority and absolute discretion to decide crimes like election crimes when the allegations come from him himself is absolutely ridiculous. So you get to make up allegations and then decide to investigate them, and because the allegations exist, they are preclusive under your executive authority? Bullshit! Moving along, they say the indictment next alleges that Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to enlist the vice president to use his ceremonial role at the January 6th certification proceeding to fraudulently alter the election results. I'm sure you guys all remember this. Trump was trying to convince Mike Pence to not certify the election. Mike Pence was like, dude, I can't not do that because it is outside the scope of the authority of the vice president. But Trump was like, do it anyway. And then he tweeted out Mike Pence is a traitor when Mike Pence refused to do it. And his cronies hung some gallows outside the Capitol building the day of January 6th. How does the Supreme Court decide that such pressure from the president on the vice president falls? Whenever the president and vice president discuss their official responsibilities, they engage in official conduct. Presiding over the January 6th certification proceeding at which members of Congress count the electoral votes is a constitutional and statutory duty of the vice president. Nobody's disputing that, Scotus. The indictment's allegation that Trump attempted to pressure the vice president to take particular acts in connection with his role at the certification proceeding thus involve official conduct. Yeah, Scotus said if he puts pressure on the vice president to do something, that's official conduct. No, motherfuckers, that's corruption. And then they pull this spineless bullshit. The question then becomes whether that presumption of immunity is rebutted under the circumstances. In other words, hey, that conversation was official conduct. Can you prove that it was unofficial? What a joke of a question. It is the government's burden to rebut the presumption of immunity. The court therefore remands the district court to assess the first... Oh my God. So rather than do their jobs and interpret these actions within the scope of the Constitution, of which they are supposed to be the most qualified, the highest court of the land to do so, they say just enough to protect Trump and then throw the rest down to the district courts. Moving along, although I'm already fucking annoyed. The indictment's remaining allegation involves Trump's interaction with persons outside the executive branch, state officials, private parties, and the general public. You remember this, right? Calling up Georgia's Secretary of State saying, hey, find me 11,380 votes, whatever the fuck it was. In particular, the indictment alleges that Trump and his co-conspirators attempted to convince certain state officials that election fraud had tainted the popular vote, which they did, What does the Supreme Court rule? On Trump's view, the alleged conduct qualifies as official because it was undertaken to ensure the integrity and proper administration of the federal election. The only allegations that that election wasn't proper was from Trump. I'm just moving from that to the last part where they talk about how the indictment says that Trump used certain language in connection to January 6th to incite it. And how do they rule? That because the communication he used was on Twitter, it falls on the outer perimeter of his official responsibilities as per the last time the Supreme Court covered his ass, which was Trump versus Hawaii. In other words, yeah, he spread a bunch of lies on Twitter, lies that were proven to be false. And those lies caused people to storm the Capitol on January 6th. But he was president, so it's just a broader way for the president to communicate with the public. Guys, the Supreme Court of the United States is no longer doing their job with any amount of impartiality. They are finding a way to protect this one man. And if this one man becomes the president again, the gavel of that Supreme Court will become the Thor's hammer that he uses to consolidate the power of the judicial branch and the legislative branch into the executive branch, making him a dictator. Don't believe me if you want to. Think it's hyperbole if you want to. But look no further than the continuance of these sham rulings to protect him as evidence of what I'm saying.